I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Until recently, treatments for both chronic and acute pain had been an area that went for decades without the development of innovative new therapies. South Rampart Pharma is seeking to develop safer and more effective pain management therapies that avoid the liver toxicity of acetaminophen, the kidney toxicity of NSAIDs, and the abuse potential of opioids. We spoke to Hernan Bazan, co-founder and CEO of South Rampart Pharma, about the need for new pain medicines, the company's first-in-class experimental analgesic, and how it avoids the problems common with other pain medications. Hernan, thanks for joining us.
Well, Danny, it's great to join you today. I've listened to your show for a few years now, so it's really a pleasure to talk to you.
We're going to talk about pain, the need for new alternatives to existing therapies, and South Rampart's pipeline of non-opioid experimental therapies to address the safety issues of existing medicines. Let's start with pain broadly, though. Can you quantify the need for pain medications and their impact on the health system today?
Yeah, well, that's really the crux of, I think, why we and others are in this space and doing the work that we're doing. As a physician, as a practicing physician, what I can tell you is that the clinical practice struggles to balance the effective and safe treatment of pain with again, patient safety are real. And what I mean by that is because of the large needs and the large voids of existing medicines that I imagine we're going to touch on. So, for example, we currently have, as you will know and your listeners know, for severe pain, opioids have a large risk of abuse and misuse and addiction. And they have a significant amount of associated problems with chronic use. And even, just sensory neural depression and constipation and so on and so forth, and without even mentioning addictive power. And then other things like what we have, which are non-steroidals, and their effect on kidney and gastrointestinal ulcers, bleeding, stomach lining ulcerations, and even in patients that take some amount of blood pressure medicine, cardiovascular events. And then the last class are acetaminophen or Tylenol and liver toxicity. That's still the number one cause of acute fulminant hepatic failure in the U.S. and other parts of the Western world. So there are significant limitations. I know we'll touch on what's been done by Vertex recently and new targets, the sodium channel inhibitors, that is specifically NaV1.8. That will hopefully find a niche. There are some nuances with that. So it's a big need. Again, as a physician, the practice struggles to balance it effectively are real, and how it impacts the healthcare system.
Well, how well do we manage pain today?
Well, in one word, Danny, I would say poorly to fair. Today, the treatment of pain really remains inadequate for some of the reasons that I outlined. Despite these available therapies that are numerous, as you can see, there are really just three classes: the opioids, the non-steroidals, and then the old acetaminophen. And now there's a fourth class of peripherally acting sodium channels, and there are several follow-on companies that are trying to work on that. And hopefully that will make some amount of difference. I think that the market has given us, and we'll touch on this, I imagine also has given us some hints of this space and what the needs are and what the rewards can be to the investors and strategics that develop these. that help back these developments because, and that's positive because these numerous available therapies are really have significant drawbacks because of their adverse effects and frankly, their limited effectiveness. Um, and as a result of all of this, many patients continue to experience uncontrolled pain or they face significant adverse effects. All of this underline the urgent needs for innovative and safer solutions.
You mentioned some of the concerns around the safety of these drugs, not only the well-known problem of addiction with opioids, but liver toxicity, kidney toxicity. I would think also the acidity of ibuprofen, my favorite drug of all. But to what extent does this really hamper our ability to treat people with pain? And do they have to make a decision just between accepting the risk or going without care?
Well, that's actually the decision that the informed patient has to make. And then unfortunately, there are many patients and individuals that don't understand the risks, and then they don't realize until afterwards. I can tell you patients that I've had that, you were talking about how great ibuprofen it is, and it is a great anti-inflammatory for acute pain. If you have a joint discomfort or something like that. But I've had several patients that have gone on to kidney failure, renal failure, needed dialysis from its overuse. That's actually, believe it or not, a bigger problem in Europe, where there are higher doses that are available over the counter. And then again, acetaminophen remains a significant cause of acute pulmonary hepatic failure. And it's present in so many other formulations, cold and sinus medicines, so that people perhaps aren't aware unless they're quite informed about those risks. And so all of these are significant safety concerns of the existing medicines, and that lead to a poor present state for chronic use.
So at a biological level, is it understood why these side effects exist? Is it a matter of targets or pathways? Is it a matter of, just the way the body processes these drugs?
Right. So absolutely. Yeah, these side effects are well known and have been known for some time. They occur primarily either to a toxic byproduct, as is the case with acetaminophen or Tylenol or Panadol, something that affects liver toxicity, or off-target effects, as you're alluding to, for like specifically non-steroidals and ibuprofen. So, for example, the NSAIDs, like ibuprofen, Advil, they inhibit a certain prostaglandin synthesis that is protective in the stomach lining and leads to GI ulceration, and also affects the metabolism of how it's expressed, that leads to, with chronic use, potential kidney injury and kidney impairment. And in fact, it also has some cardiovascular effects. It can exacerbate blood pressure in some patients that are antihypertensive. And so, when you think about what happened, and I think it's important to understand what's happening in the past, because there were selective super aspirins, which were the COX-2 inhibitors that you may have recall from the 90s and early 2000s. They were intended to avoid these side effects, but they themselves proved to have, once they came into the market, unfortunately, significant cardiovascular risk factors, risk of heart attack and stroke. And then these big, blockbuster drugs were withdrawn, like Vioxx in 2004 and Bextra in 2005. So all of this, I think, is important because of where we are now of developing more targeted therapies, like we're working to do with SRP-001, which avoids a lot of these biological pitfalls by acting centrally in the brain, eliminating harmful metabolites, being a non-NSAID, non-steroidal. We'll touch on the sodium channels, I imagine, and the great work that Vertex Pharmaceutical has done, and several follow-on companies are trying to do, like working on the periphery. In a way, these are sort of like super lidocaines, because lidocaine is something that we use in the clinic and in the operating room. You get a great immediate numbing effect. These sodium channels are super selective, and hopefully they'll find a niche, and without any kind of off-target effects. Again, I think some things within the market and with the way the market has spoken, has made it clear that there will be a significant space for multiple targets if they're proven to be effective and safe, so that pain can be enhanced the way we're treating it compared to what we've done now for a few decades.
There are other markets where you could say the economics just prevent drug developers from pursuing innovative new therapies, but it doesn't seem to be the case in pain medications. Why haven't we seen more innovation in this area?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you're thinking about antibiotics, but that's a perfect example of, but that's a whole different, I think you've had a show on that actually. But we don't have to get into those specifics. I think what happened with pain, that's an important question that you're asking. Why haven't we seen more innovation in this area? It's really, there were, I think in the past, bad targets, not good science. There weren't good clinical models that led to, sound phase 1 and more importantly, efficacious phase 2 trial designs with hard endpoints. And then it was almost like the perfect storm, because then the opioid lawsuits caused several traditionally big pharma players that were in pain for many years and had an interest in it to withdraw from the pain space. So all of those things led to, I think, the lack of innovation. You may be aware, some of your listeners may be aware of the BIO report, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, the BIO report that came out now a couple of years ago. I was actually at the BioCO Investor Conference on the panel when it was first revealed with Dave Thomas, who wrote it, who's one of the two authors of that report. And it talked about the dearth of innovation in the pain space and why and how. And he didn't quite delve into this, but he talked about how small the amount of funding is compared to, say, oncology, cardiovascular disease, and other areas, despite the prevalence being much larger. And again, I think a lot of it had to do with not good targets, not good scientific basis, and not good clinical models, and not having the hard endpoints in phase 2 trials. So we need to learn from that, which is what we and others are doing to work to take it to the next level.
So we're talking about pain rather generically here, but it's not monolithic. There are many different types of pain. Is there some way we should be thinking about the different types of pain and different intensities of pain and thinking about therapeutic approaches?
Yes. Well, pain is extremely, one of the challenges that it's a subjective thing. So your pain threshold is going to be different than mine. You may have a higher one than me, or vice versa. And that just starts to describe what the physiologic and molecular basis of pain are. And that's why I think really getting to the molecular basis of pain is important, because then with that, once you understand those mechanisms of actions, that translates into, I think, clinically measurable endpoints. And that's exactly what we're doing with SRP-001. By understanding how it works in the brain centrally to reduce pain, which is sort of what also the approach taken with the sodium channel inhibitors, trying to understanding the periphery based on null mutations and these man on fire, clinical anecdotes that we're seeing worldwide about how the pain threshold could be basically taken away. Hopefully then, with something like that, when something like that is delivered as a therapeutic, because there's so many sodium channels all over the body, there will not be any off-target effects. Again, thinking about it as a super lidocaine. But yes, pain is a broad problem with multiple physiologic and molecular bases. But I think understanding those molecular mechanisms can translate and is translating and will translate to clinically measurable endpoints with the approach that we're taking.
So on a personal note, you're a vascular surgeon. How did you become involved in discovering and developing new pain therapies?
Well, obviously, being a practicing physician, the clinical need is real. It's something that we see daily. And then I became very interested in the scientific basis of this. The other co-founder is actually my father, who's the head of the neuroscience center at the medical school. And when we began on this with a collaboration with a medicinal chemist in Spain, actually I was communicating with him earlier today, we did all of the work to design a library of compounds that would lack the liver toxicity of acetaminophen, yet maintain its pain relieving properties. And there was a lot of excitement how we did this and the results that we were getting. And so this actually led me to submit, and we were fortunate to receive 2 NIH grants early on, including a combined phase 1, phase 2 fast track. So we've had great funding support from NINDS and the HEAL to help into addiction long term. And then we were able, with all of the evidence that we were gathering, raise a little funding to get from the pre-IND to an open IND and into the clinic. We were awarded FDA fast track designation, and now we're phase 2 ready in 3 pipelines. And I think having a clinical approach, I'd spent a couple of years at the NIH doing immunology research. Having all of that background and having this clinical approach allowed us to take a different approach in forming a life science company, because we've been able to be very lean in putting the great majority of our funding into the development of the technology without any full-time hires, so that we don't have to have a lot of the funding go towards a significant overhead. And we've amassed a unique team. So we have director of CMC, chemistry, manufacturing control. So he's been with us since 2019, and he works on a fractional basis and knows the physical properties of the lead asset forwards and backwards. We have a really good clinical pharmacologist, our regulatory in Boston, our CFOs in New York. And now we've teamed with arguably the best group to execute the phase 2 randomized trial, with a group that has basically actually did Vertex's trial. It has worked with Merck, J&J, GSK, Lilly. So the team, and as you know well from everything, all the people you've spoken with, that having the right team is so important to execute a promising technology. And fortunately, with all of this that we've been able to put together, again, having that clinical basis and that drive, because of the need that I see, that we see, has allowed us to get here in a very efficient way.
Well, what is your lead experimental therapy, SRP-001? How does it work?
So SRP-001 is our lead clinical asset. And what I want to share with you is something that we described most recently in a scientific reports publication in May of 2024. It's a novel small molecule, so it's an NCA, new chemical entity, that we know crosses the blood-brain barrier. So when we take a deuterated or radiolabeled, we know crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it localizes to the pain-sensing area of the brain called the PAG region, the periapical gray area. And there, it converts and it targets something called AM404. AM404 is an important molecule because this is a central mechanism of action for how another existing pain medication that's being in use today worldwide works, which is acetaminophen Tylenol. So that produces AM404. Interestingly, what we've been able to demonstrate is on an equal molar basis, when you take the same amount on a molar basis, not in milligrams per kilogram, not in concentration, but in molar basis, which it's a more pure chemistry way of comparing, say, 2 different molecules. It produces more AM404. So it's more efficient in producing AM404. So we know it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It gets taken up in the pain-sensing nucleus of the brain and the midbrain, the PAG region, the peripheral area. It's very efficient at producing AM404. And again, remember I mentioned to you that the collaboration with the medicinal chemist team in Spain, actually, we were able to put in a central region called a benzoquinoamine that avoids the product, the byproduct, which is called NAPKI, which is how liver toxicity ensues with acetaminophen, Tylenol, Panadol. And as a non-NSAID, because it's not non-steroidal like ibuprofen, fortunately, it doesn't have the kidney or gastrointestinal stomach lining injury or effects on the cardiovascular system. Obviously, it doesn't engage the opioid receptors because it's a non-opioid. So that's been our approach. And what we're able to also show, besides that it produces AM404, I was mentioning the molecular basis, it also turns on 3 distinct genomic pathways, gene signaling pathways. And we were able to elucidate this with using 10x single cell genomics, 3 different gene pathways that are involved in pain. And so all of this has gotten translated into the animal models that we've demonstrated effective pain relief. And so we're really looking forward to the upcoming phase 2 trial.
And how was SRP-001 discovered?
Well, that's exactly with this work with this medicinal chemist in the library of compounds that we set out. So we had a library of compounds. So we initially published that in the European Journal of Medicine and Chemistry in 2020, where we talked about how we came up with the library, and then sort of the killer experiments, if you will, that we did to demonstrate the lack of consistent toxicities, and then the consistent analgesia or pain relieving, and then more recently gone into more details into mechanisms in the scientific reports paper. There, we also included the completed phase 1 human studies, which were 56 subjects. And so it's a lot of information. And that was done with an oral formulation, which is what we have now. We've also worked on an intravenous, and so an IV formulation. We've been fortunate to be able to elucidate as well. So that's another pipeline for the future.
You mentioned this crosses the blood-brain barrier, but when you think of pain, is it something you're trying to treat in the brain or at the site of injury?
Yeah. Good question. So it's all perception. So it's such a fast-moving thing. So there's the peripheral nervous system, something that you sense when you have some sort of noxious stimuli, some sort of painful stimuli. But all of the processing is done centrally. So by working centrally, and again, that's an important aspect of SRP-001, that it works centrally compared to the periphery, is a way of perhaps addressing multiple pain conditions. You mentioned before the physiological basis and so on, and yes, there's various that are different, but it works centrally. And by doing that with 3844, and then the gene pathways that I mentioned that we demonstrated in the scientific reports paper, we feel comfortable and confident that based on those mechanisms, the animal models, that we should get strong positive data from our phase 2 trial.
And what indications are you pursuing with 001?
So we've been fortunate, again, based on all of this data, to get the green light to do an acute phase 2. Based on also, we haven't talked about this, but we also have a very strong neuropathic pain model, a cisplatin chemotherapy model. And so we've also gotten the green light to do a phase 2 in neuropathic pain. And even as an adjunct for migraine headaches, we've also done the chemistry, the formulation to do an intravenous, an IV formulation from the current nanosuspension. And this would be significant for acute post-operative pain in the hospital, in a different setting. So we have all of those indications. The most current one is acute, and we can touch upon, why we're focused on that based on market feedback and so on. Because you can imagine, otherwise it would be a significant race to do these 4 at the same time.
What's known about 001 from the studies you've conducted to date?
Well, we published this originally in the scientific reports in May of 2024, like I mentioned, which actually, Danny, believe it or not, it's still trending in the 99th percentile for online attention. And there we demonstrated robust pharmacokinetics, robust PKs with a very high uptake within an hour. And that's in contradistinction actually to the newer sodium channel inhibitor that the early data suggested may have somewhat of a delayed onset. And I think that's why there's some follow-on compounds there that are trying to improve on those PKs. So SRP-001 has very robust pharmacokinetics, so very high uptake within an hour, and a remarkably long half-life, the order of about 3 to 4x what's currently available. And again, they're described, besides the molecular mechanisms, demonstrated the animal models, the 3 different animal models, demonstrating the pain relief, the efficacy.
And how about in terms of safety? You mentioned that it doesn't seem to have the liver toxicity, but is there anything that limits the dosing of this?
Sure. And obviously, we have our data, and then that will need to be determined with subsequent studies. What I can share is our phase one randomized study was fortunately quite clean. We did a SAD and MAD single ascending and multiple ascending dose in 56 subjects. And yes, there were fortunately, no issues at all with specifically no serious adverse effects, no changes in any of the blood chemistries that were measured or coagulation or hematological studies like the CBC. So, right. So no liver injury because it doesn't produce the toxic metabolite NAPK. And again, as a non-NSAID, it's not structured as a non-steroidal, doesn't affect prostaglandin synthesis. So it doesn't inhibit its production, leading to GI ulceration or kidney impairment, kidney injury. And as a non-opioid, it doesn't engage in opioid receptors. So it shouldn't have any sort of abuse potential.
And what's the development path forward?
Well, we are very focused on now executing a phase 2 trial in acute pain. And the reason for acute pain is that these are very good surrogates for efficacy that are reliable and are quite predictive for future studies. And it can be quite capital efficient versus having something drag on for a long time. So the way that we're going to be rolling this out, we're going to be able to enroll 40 plus subjects a month. So be able to complete a 200 subject study in a quite efficient time, particularly also with data lockout and submitting the results to the FDA. And so that's the sort of the focus that we're taking on at this point.
Now, what are the endpoints for that study?
So there are going to be significant primary and secondary endpoints. The primary endpoints are going to be how the pain is different per subject, basically standardized to each individual subject within 4 to 6 hours. These are called SPID 4 to 6, some pain intensity difference between 4 and 6 hours. So those are the traditional ones. And one has to be quite purposeful in how they're measured. And again, I mentioned briefly the group that we're going to execute this with has had a tremendous amount of experience, and more recently as well with the large groups, not only Vertex itself, but also J&J, Merck, GSK, and others, and Lilly. So a lot of experience with doing these. Obviously, we've learned from those trials, so there are some enhancements to it, particularly with secondary endpoints, the time to rescue medication, the time to perceptible pain, and other secondary endpoints that I think will be quite revealing about not only its onset of action, but any sort of subtleties that describe its efficacy will be able to be revealed in this phase 2 study.
You alluded to the Vertex approval earlier for a non-opioid pain reliever. Any sense how your therapy might compare in terms of mechanism of action, in terms of safety and efficacy?
Yes, well, SOP differs significantly from the Vertex new approval, Turnivax or susertigine, in several key ways. The first, the mechanism of action. So Turnivax is a peripherally acting sodium channel blocker, NaV1.8. I called it a super lidocaine just to help understand. Super selective. While SRP-001 works centrally by generating AIM-404. Again, it's an active metabolite that modulates pain pathways in the brain, in the pain sensing area, the midbrain, the productive gray area. In this central mechanism of action, we feel will help address more complex or refractory pain states that perhaps peripherally only drugs won't be able to fully manage. The second is the safety profile of SRP-001. Again, we talked about how it doesn't produce the liver toxic metabolite the way it was designed when we did this with the medicinal chemist, and it doesn't, as an NSAID, lead to kidney or GI tract. So we're hoping and we're aiming that this will open the door to higher or more chronic dosing and effectively widening the therapeutic index. I shared how we demonstrated in the scientific reports paper that on an equal molar basis, it's more efficient at producing M404, again, without the dose limiting effect. And so we're hoping that this will also help with higher dosing and more efficacy. And in terms of the safety profile, the other point is we don't infect, something that's omnipresent like sodium channels. So hopefully avoid any sort of off-target effects. And again, because it targets the CNS, the central nervous system, we're aiming for more broad and complementary release alongside, hopefully, some patients that will be helped by peripherally acting agents like sodium inhibitors. So all of these things are ways in which SRP-001 differs significantly from the sodium channel inhibitors like Vertex new approval.
At the start of the year, the No Pain Act took effect. This is legislation intended to expand access to non-opioid pain management options for Medicare patients. What's the potential impact of this legislation on South Rampart?
This is something that I think groups like Vertex and others should really be commended because they did a tremendous amount of leadership on this. The No Pain Act is a potential game changer for companies like ours because it mandates separate add-on payments for FDA-approved non-opioid pain medications under Medicare, obviously, so patients over the age of 65. And by doing so, it's going to give hospitals and ambulatory surgery centers a strong financial incentive to adopt these novel therapies, including SRP-001, when it makes it to that stage. One of the big critiques in this space has been, how are you going to compare to, cheap branded generics, including opioids that are dirt cheap? So all of this is going to, I think, help sort of balance that playing field. So in practical terms, all of this should lower the reimbursement hurdles and accelerate the market access so that this will hopefully encourage physicians and physician extenders like PAs and NPs to choose safer non-opioid treatments without having to worry about the price differential. And this is precisely where SRP-001 is designed to excel in. There are also some state-level legislation standing that are encouraging similar reimbursements. So all of this is important because one of the, again, prior criticisms was how this would compare against, more inexpensive generics. So I think this is another reason why the pain space has evolved because of this legislative assistance.
You touched on the NIH grants you've had to date. The company is remarkably capital efficient from what I've seen, but how much has the company raised in terms of financing to date?
Well, to date, we've been very fortunate in securing financing through a combination of dilutive through strategic investments and non-dilutive NIH grants, including actually 2 new applications that are under review. And we're now finalizing the Series A round to execute the phase 2 trial. And also looking at ways to strategically expand the full pipeline that we touched upon earlier. All of these things will get us to, be able to address high-value pain indications. So we have the cash runway to go through the phase 2 trial and beyond to develop another pipeline. And again, it's all, as you mentioned, being capital efficient through a combination of the dilutive and the non-dilutive funding.
It has been a challenging financial environment for many emerging biotechs. What has the conversation with investors been like?
So yes, to do this, it's interesting, Danny. In the past year, what we've done is we had met this group some time ago. We've worked with Outcome Capital. It's an advisory investment bank group based in Boston. And they're quite unique because they have their team are all PhDs, some MDs, but all of them have also a finance degrees. And they've both been on both the seller and the buying side. They've been on both the investment side and the buying side. So they also have unique perspectives. So we've gone to market for SRP-001 and the library of compounds with Outcome Capital and received important feedback that has formed our current strategy that we're deploying, specifically with the phase 2 acute pain. So, yes, as you mentioned, there's been a challenging macroeconomic climate. Specifically with outcome, the strategic and investment conversations we've had have been quite encouraging, particularly because of Vertex's recent approval, and because of our favorable NIH backing and our FDA fast track designation. And then what you just mentioned, the legislation, the No Pain Act. So it's really the right momentum. I'll share with you. So when Vertex received approval, their market for acute pain in late January, their market cap changed $7 billion. So that was real important information and data about how the market perceives acute pain. Go back to December of 2024, just a month and a half earlier, when they presented phase 2 data in chronic pain, lower back pain, that the market didn't really perceive as very strong. Their market cap changed $15 billion over 2 days. That was for chronic pain. So those are two real important market indicators now in the last couple of months about how they view acute and chronic pain. But I think all of this, again, helps understand the financing environment and what how the market perceives it, that are going to be very helpful to novel target assets like SRP-001 and others that are being developed to move forward.
Well, is this approach to being capital efficient, is that a reflection of the financing environment, and is it to be as guarded on spending? How has it affected what you have decided to pursue in the clinic and how you've staffed up and other strategic decisions like that?
And again, that's been our approach to take sort of a different approach, to put the great majority of what we raise towards the development of the technology, to get through value inflection points and to really meet the hard endpoints. And then, as I mentioned, work with Outcome Capital, going to market. They specifically told us, we really like how well characterized SRP-001 is. We really like the phase 1 data. We understand how it works in the brain. There's a lot of data mechanistically. Show us efficacy in the phase 2. So rather than working on 3 and even 4 pipelines at once, if you count the IV formulation as another pipeline, then we're focused on generating data from the phase 2 in acute pain. And obviously that's a smaller race than having to race for all 4 at once. So again, it has formed the financing environment, and the strategic feedback that we got going to market has formed exactly what we're doing now, which has been very helpful.
Hernan Bazan, co-founder and CEO of South Rampart Pharma. Hernan, thanks so much for your time today.
Danny, I really enjoyed it, and thank you for the questions and the opportunity.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.